There was some mention also of implants that would lend themselves to surveillance by providing radio signals. This could be under the skin, or a dental implant put in like a filling, so that either fugitives or possibly every citizen could be identified by a certain frequency from his personal transmitter and could be located at any time or in any place by any authority who wanted to find him. You'll be watching television and somebody will be watching you at the same time at a central monitoring station. Television sets would have a device to enable this. The TV set would not have to be on in order for this to be operative. Also, the television set can be used to monitor what you are watching on the TV and how you're reacting to what you're watching. You would not know that you were being watched while you were watching your television. By the time people found out that this monitoring was going on, they would also be already very dependent upon television for a number of things. You wouldn't have to leave your home to purchase. You just turn on your TV and there would be a way of interacting with the television channel to the store that you wanted to purchase, and you could flip the switch from place to place to choose a refrigerator or clothing. This would be both convenient, but it also would make you dependent on the television, so that the built-in monitor is something you could not do without.
Hey, Inspire Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers. It's John Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in. It is Thursday, January 2nd, 2025. Isn't that unbelievable? We're healthy, we're wealthy, we're whole, we're free. That's the mantra. Thank you for joining us on X, Rumble, and YouTube. In the live chat, our dear friends are here. Our wonderful moderator, Ronnie, is here. Christine is here. Wise Thumbs in the live chat. And today we're in the third and final part of the series about this 1969 revelation of the basically New World, takeover plan, which was called the New Barbarian Order, or New Order of the Barbarians. And to give you a quick recap, then we'll go into these revelations. And before we go into any of those things, I want to share something that was just released by the White House on their YouTube channel. And I encourage you after the show to go over there and watch what they put out on their YouTube channel. You probably throw up a little bit in your mouth. That's the natural reaction. And you will see what the signal is. What stands out throughout the video is that every single face you see is masked. And this is, of course, total virtue signaling. They're putting this out there because they are, I presume by the end of this month, they want to have the new bird flu bullshit going fully. And it doesn't have to. It's actually completely up to us. No matter what they throw at us, it is always up to us. But they're really, really wanting to. They're wanting to push this out. Mysterious fogs all over the world. There's so much that we will go to in the next days. But for today, let's finish out this series here. So quick reminder, what happened is that in 1969, a pediatrician named Dr. Dunegan visited a lecture by another quite prolific pediatrician called Dr. Richard Day. And the lecture was visited by other or attended by other pediatricians. And Dr. Richard Day, unbeknownst to the audience, said, we're going to do something a little different here, and asked everyone not to take notes, not to record this. And he basically laid out the complete totalitarian system takeover plan. Now, they must have been so confident in 1969 because they put out a lot of stuff in that year. Remember, the BBC in the UK put out the Newsbenders live theater spiel, which of course showed exactly the same thing from another angle. What we're going to talk about today is so futuristic, looking from the perspective of 1969, that it is just mind-blowing. However, all of this has played out and is playing out. So let's go right into it, because later on, Dr. Dunegan, who did take notes, recorded 3 tapes and preserved what he had heard that March day in 1969 for the public. So we're going to jump right into where we left off a couple days ago. Another aspect of this new order of the barbarians and how they were going to bring in the totalitarian system were going to be travel restrictions and implanted ID. Once again, we're talking from the perspective of Dr. Dunegan, who was in the audience listening to that lecture, and he later took notes, okay? And it's 1969. Keep all that in mind. Travel would become highly restricted, requiring permission and a valid reason. Well, we've seen this in many countries during the COVID era on full display. This is exactly what happened. Everyone would need an ID, initially a card, later replaced by a skin implanted device coded to the individual. This would prevent loss or false IDs, challenges including developing biocompatible materials for implants that wouldn't cause rejection or infection while storing retrievable data. Silicon, already used in breast implants, was considered promising for its tolerance and data storage potential. Now, this is 1969. Keep in mind that we're today talking about the replacement of our carbon-based bodies with silicon. Of course, Silicon Valley, you know, they put it in a name. Out in Cali is driving this to a large degree, but they're also terraforming, changing the earth to better host, at least for, you know, one part of this is to better host silicon-based life. Food control. Food supplies would come under tight control. If population growth didn't slow down, food shortages could be created in a hurry, and people would realize the dangers of overpopulation. Thank you. Ultimately, whether the population slows down or not, the food supply is to be brought under centralized control so that people would have enough to be well nourished, but they would not have enough to support any fugitive from the new system. In other words, if you had a friend or relative who didn't sign on, and growing one's own food would be outlawed. This would be done under some sort of pretext. There was a mention then of weather. Let's go back to the food thing, because this is something that's been going on for the last years at such a heightened pace that it is so in our faces. You might recall that we have lost over hundreds of food plants only in the United States, processing plants, meat plants. We've had significant droughts that killed a lot of the livestock. We had quote unquote viruses due to which they killed off entire herds and a lot of millions of cattle and chickens and whatnot. You have an ever tighter grip by a few small corporations who run the entire industry and have, to a large degree, patented ownership over the crossed breeds and the genetically modified foods or crops, at least. So you have a tremendous centralization of power. You have a war that's been going on for over 2 years now in the Ukraine, which is one of the largest wheat producers in the world. You have ongoing tensions in the main shipping routes and straits in the world. So all of this, there is and has been going on. If you know people like Michael Jan, for example, or even Ann Vandersteel, they're correspondents who have focused a lot on the attack on the food supply. So has Mike Adams, the health ranger, over the last years, and give a lot of data on what's been happening on that front. No doubt about it that the food supply chain has not just been disrupted, but also taken over fully. You add to that more and more restrictions to small farmers, small ranchers, the requirements being extremely high. And then you take into account the rates, for example, on Amish farmers and ranchers that are producing some of the healthiest, best, and nutrient dense foods because they were giving away raw milk to people. All of that crap is really happening, which is probably unthinkable in 1969 to think of such a dimension. There was a mention then of weather, said Dr. Dunegan. This was another really striking statement. We can or soon will be able to control the weather. He, being Dr. Day, said, I'm not merely referring to dropping iodide crystals into the clouds to precipitate rain that's already there, but real control. And weather was seen as a weapon of war, a weapon of influencing public policy. It could make rain or withhold rain in order to influence certain areas and bring them under your control. There was no statement how this would be done. It was stated that either it was already possible or very, very close to being possible. As you might recall, we did an entire show on, actually multiple shows, on all the patents that are out there on weather control, weather manipulation. In the 60s, the Soviet Union and the United States, that it was actually publicly announced in the newspapers, had reached an agreement that they would not attack each other with weather weapons. And there is a international treaty on the books that prevents that from happening. But there are no laws on the books that prevent a government from using weather manipulation against its own populations, which of course we know this has been going on to a much larger degree than people would like to believe. If you listen to people like Dale Wigington from geoengineeringwatch.org, who spent the last 25 years or so researching this subject, he'll tell you that we haven't had quote unquote natural weather in probably over 20 years. So that's just something to take into account. Of course, in 1969, to most people, this must have sounded like complete science fiction. On politics, he said that very few people really know how government works. Something to the effect that elected officials are influenced in ways that they don't even realize, and they carry out plans that have been made for them, and they think that they are the authors of the plans. But actually, they're manipulated in ways they don't understand. This is probably one of the most significant statements, because people oftentimes have a sort of black or white perception of politicians, and that they're all just evil by nature. Actually, they're not. It is much more difficult to keep someone in line for 20, 30 years. Think about it, a congressman, a senator, if they deem themselves to be powerless, or if they think they don't really contribute anything, they're just puppets. They have to actually believe themselves to be powerful. So you do this by mind control, by putting people in their sphere who whisper in their ears and who manipulate them more subtly, which is always more successful than just the open pressure. Of course, oftentimes blackmail and open pressure are the only thing that works on these people, but just to sort of understand the psychological aspect of this manipulation, it is much easier to do actually than you would think, to place some, because these are all, most of them are very power hungry people. They lack confidence, they lack certain things. So that's what they oftentimes go into politics for. So when you give that to them, give them this image of self-importance, maintain it, they will actually do things the way that you want them to do without even knowing it. And this goes, of course, into the highest levels, right? Presidents and prime ministers. Some of them are just plain evil, of course, no doubt about it. Know how people respond, making them do what you want. Somewhere in the presentation, he made two statements that I want to insert at this time. I don't remember just where they were made, but they're valid in terms of general overall view. One statement: people can carry in their minds and act upon two contradictory ideas at one time, provided that these two contradictory ideas are kept far enough apart. So I'm gonna linger on that statement for a moment here, because this is cognitive dissonance and compartmentalization in one. This is what we see in the world today. When people hear on the one side about all the crap, for example, that's sold as food, the dyes, the poisons, the whatnots, right? And they hear They hear this in one context. Let's say the documentary is somewhere, and then they go to a restaurant, or they go to a fast food place, or they go to a store and buy that crap. That is almost almost all people now know the crap that's in there. But these two ideas are still too far apart, just like with medicine, just like with all the other things. It is the art of keeping people in cognitive dissonance, which on a subconscious level has the effect that people lose self-respect, because the subconscious knows the contradiction, right? You just consciously don't realize it, but the subconscious knows the contradiction, and it produces a feeling of shame and a loss of self-respect, which is, of course, absolutely wanted by these psychopaths. The other statement is, you can know pretty well how rational people are going to respond to certain circumstances or to certain information that they encounter. So to determine the response you want, you need only control the kind of data or information that they're presented, or the kinds of circumstance that they're in. And being rational people, they'll do what you want them to do. They may not fully understand what they're doing or why. Well, guess what? Let's take these two concepts and apply them to the COVID era. You had every Friday Dr. Evil come out, Dr. Fauci come out, and put out his new statement of the week, telling people what this week's thing to do is, right? And most often between one week and another, there was a contradiction in those statements. So he basically contradicted himself on the previous week and now told people to do the opposite. He came out and said masks don't work, they don't protect people, there's really nothing there. Later, double mask. And all that. I mean, there were so many things. So what happened to people were a number of things. They had these contradictory statements, but they believed both of them somehow. They lost self-respect for believing one lie one week and then believing the next lie next week. And the power structure was playing the game of, let's give them enough fear because we know how they're going to react to that fear. You have it. This is the perfect, and it's understandable to everyone because we've all lived through it, right? We've all seen it. And we're seeing the beginning stages of yet another one of those. And you will see, shockingly, you will see people react even more obediently than they did the first time around, because they've doubled down on their programming. Of course, you will see many, many more people who will not, which is the beautiful thing about this, right? Oops, here we go. Another thing, falsified scientific research. Is like we're on a roll here with the COVID era, right? Somewhere in this connection, then, was a statement admitting that some scientific research data could be, and indeed has been, falsified in order to bring about desired results. And here was said, people don't ask the right questions. Some people are too trusting. Really? Well, studies show that what studies show depends on who pays for the studies. Let me repeat that. Studies show that what studies show depends on who pays for them. This used to be done subtly. It's not subtle anymore. The way that this works is that specific organization hire research centers or doctors or scientists at universities, and they literally tell them what their outcome needs to be. And then they hire those scientists to find a scientific path to that outcome. In that scientific path, they won't necessarily lie, but they will omit whatever doesn't fit that path. So they'll just leave it out. And so they'll give you a statement that sounds like drinking 2 glasses of red wine every night is good for your, I don't know, something in your body. They won't say that it is bad for all the other parts of your body. They won't say that alcohol has no redeeming quality, for example, because that's not what that study was supposed to do. That study was paid for by the California winemakers, and their lobby went and said, we need that study to say this. This is how this works. And the researchers go, but I didn't lie. Did I tell the whole truth? Can neither confirm nor deny. And that's just one of the more innocent things. The other thing that they do is when things tend out to be problematic. Like, remember Roundup? And then they say, Roundup is now banned or will be banned in certain countries. They're not saying the substance gets banned, but the product gets banned. So you just rename the product that contains a substance and you're fine. These are workaround. That's what the scientific community is for these days. The scientists and the lawyers get together and they create some bullshit studies. They call them peer reviewers, and they're mainly lies on top of lies. Anyhow, Dr. Dunegan said, out of all this was to come the new international governing body, probably to come through the UN and with a world court, but not necessarily through those structures. It could be brought about in other ways. Could he be talking about something like the WHO? It's not a world court, but what did the WHO do earlier this year? They didn't get their pandemic treaty through, but they didn't have to, because they had the amendment to the international health regulations. We reported on this over and over again. James Roguski is the guy to listen and watch and read on his Substack and all the podcasts he goes on. That's his subject. But basically, it has codified into some sort of international law that trumps national sovereignty, some of the most egregious health regulations that you could possibly think about. This is exactly how it is done. The new system would be brought in, if not by peaceful cooperation, everybody willingly yielding national sovereignty, then by bringing the nation to the brink of nuclear war. That's the totalitarian system. What have we been hearing about for the last 1.5 years? How often have you heard World War III, nuclear war? Those two terms over and over and over and over and over again. Why? To put a shit ton of pressure on you so that ultimately every nation will yield, and the people will yield to avoid that. And this is exactly, look at what was said in 1969. And everybody would be so fearful, as hysteria is created by the possibility of nuclear war, that there would be a strong public outcry to negotiate a public peace, and people would willingly give up national sovereignty in order to achieve peace. And thereby, this would bring in the new international political system. If there were too many people in the right places who resisted this, there might be a need to use one or two, possibly more, nuclear weapons. As it was put, this would be possibly needed to convince people that we mean business. That was followed by the statement that by the time one or two of those went off, then everybody, even the most reluctant, would yield. Shit, if you're bombing the fucking world, excuse me, pardon my French, if you're bombing the world into oblivion, of course people are going to say at some point, just stop, right? He said something about this negotiated peace would be very convincing, as kind of in a framework or in a context that the whole thing was rehearsed, but nobody would know it. People hearing about it would be convinced that it was a genuine negotiation between hostile enemies who finally had come to the realization that peace was better than war, which alludes to the fact that while some generals in the military and some people in the echelons of power are totally playing this war game, they totally believe in the hostilities between nations, in the real power structure behind the scenes, there's no such thing as hostilities. There's only nations, presidents, armies, lobbyists, and other people who are used in certain ways to achieve certain goals. Do you think on the highest level of power, China, Russia, Iran, Israel, America, at odds? Sure, on the world stage, congressmen, senators, they believe that to a large degree. But the people who are calling the shots, or the entities who are calling the shots, they're using them as tools. If peace suits them, peace it is. If war suits them, war it is. Every single time. If famine is needed, famine is created. If a disaster is needed, a disaster is created. Remember Turkey? Nobody freaking talks about Turkey anymore. Turkey, Erdogan, the president, did not want Finland and Sweden and Ukraine, for that matter, in NATO. I believe, no, it was Finland. I know it was Finland. I think it was Finland, and there was talk, of course, about Ukraine at war. It doesn't matter. He was blocking it, but I think it was Finland and Sweden. And a few days later, after his public announcement that he was not going to yield, Turkey experienced one of the worst earthquakes of all time, which killed hundreds of thousands of people in Turkey and Syria because it was in a border region. And I came out that day and I called it. I can pull up that show and I said, listen to this. If Erdogan comes out in the following week and agrees to the new NATO members, this was 100% a seismic weapon. Erdogan came out a few days later and said, it's okay, they can come to NATO. They don't give a shit. They don't give a shit about life. It means nothing to them. If people could finally wrap their minds around that, we could make a huge step forward. Terrorism. Come on, this was 1969, okay? Keep that in perspective. There was a discussion of terrorism. Terrorism would be used widely in Europe and in other parts of the world. Terrorism at that time was thought would not be necessary in the United States. It could become necessary in the United States if the United States did not move rapidly enough into accepting the system. But at least in a foreseeable future, it was not planned. Maybe terrorism would not be required here, but the implication being that it would be indeed used if it was necessary. I'll tell you what. I remember the years 2000, 2001, traveling in the United States, doing things, going places, concerts, sports events, and whatnot. It was a beautiful atmosphere. Before 9/11, you sort of had, there were problems. Don't get me wrong, and a lot of the problems, were big enough for a lot of people. But the general atmosphere was good. It was relaxed. It was friendly. You went into a stadium. Nobody was worried about any bullshit. People were having fun, and it was good. Good girl. Then what happened? You had 9/11. And after that, I don't think I've ever seen, except for COVID, I don't think I've ever seen changes happening so fast and so all encompassing in such a short period of time. I've never seen that before. You went into an airport and everybody was worried about people who look different, and everybody was treating people that were having a little darker skin different. It was so in the programming. And then, of course, you had to roll out of this tight security system, and traveling turned into a shit show. And, it's like pushing cattle through the gates and whatnot. So obviously they deemed that terrorism was going to be necessary, and the United States experienced not just 9/11, but a whole decade of pushing terrorism every single day. Remember the alerts? Remember the different colors that the news stations had on, and it was code red, code orange, code whatever, and it was just constant bombardment. Predicted in 1969. And yeah, of course, the Patriot Act, thousands of pages of horrific legislation. They just came up with that right after 9/11 within a few days. You know how that goes. It wasn't already shelved and just waiting. You could have never, ever passed the Patriot Act, which was basically the deconstruction of the Constitution, the official deconstruction of the Constitution. You could have never passed that without 9/11. Never in a million years. Along with this came a bit of a scolding that Americans had it too good anyways, and just a little bit of terrorism would help convince Americans that the world is indeed a dangerous place, or it can be if we don't relinquish control to the proper authorities. Then it came to financial control, and here we're going to really see 1969, this was said. There was discussion of money and banking. One statement was inflation is infinite. You can put an infinite number of zeros after any number and put the decimal points wherever you want, as an indication that inflation is a tool of the controllers. Money would become predominantly credit. it was already. Money is primarily a credit thing, but exchange of money would be not cash or palpable things, but electronic credit signals. 1969, I don't think there was most people were keeping cash in a coffee can. You know, most people were, it was, and later, much later in the 1969, this was still what most people would do. It was all very analog, and even the idea of a computer being part of this and a big computer system in the background just wasn't it. It just wasn't in the minds of people. So this is how much foresight they had. People would carry money only in very small amounts for things like chewing gum and candy bars. That was the prediction. Just pocket sort of things. Any purchase, and even now, people don't even pay for gum with cash any longer. Any purchase of any significant amount would be done electronically. Earnings would be electronically entered into your account. It would be a single banking system. It may have the appearance of being more than one, but ultimately and basically, it would be one single banking system. So that when you got paid, your pay would be entered for you into your account balance. And then when you purchased anything at that point of purchase, it would be deducted from your account balance and you would actually carry nothing with you. Can you imagine explaining this to an audience in 1969? Having the detail, it is one thing to predict trends, right? It's one thing to sort of know where the world is going, but to be able to lay out the details so structured, so clear, it's not just foresight. I think it's hindsight more than anything, because I think these progressions, these technocratic progressions have happened before in previous civilizations. And to a small group of people, this information is always accessible. It was never lost. It was lost to the public. So I think whether that is by using time travel technology or whether that's simply by preserving knowledge, it is almost impossible, because here's also how this technological rollout on a more organic level works. You can see this often. They're rolling out 3-4 different streams of new technologies, and they're looking at which one really captures people's attention, right? Not all of those 4 streams will move forward. One will. And right after 9/11, they were pushing hard for implants. It was becoming increasingly a thing like, you're already putting chips in your pet. Why not in your child? You know where they are, you can track them, but it simply wouldn't fly, right? And that was in 2002, right? Early 2002 into 3. But just a few short years later, what came out was basically where you didn't necessarily need the chips to achieve a similar effect with smartphones. Smartphones and the capability of them to access the internet, it, for a period of time, 20 years or so, it replaced the necessity for implants, because everybody's carrying it. It's all the information on there. Everybody's inputting all the information. You can be tracked, traced, analyzed. So this has happened. Also, computer records can be kept on whatever it was you purchased, so that if you were purchasing too much of any particular item and some official wanted to know what you were doing with your money, they could go back and review your purchases and determine what you were buying. I mean, they didn't need computers for that. Once people were using more and more credit cards, that was possible. But of course, now it's instant with the technology. There was a statement that any purchase of significant size, like an automobile, bicycle, a refrigerator, a radio, or television, or whatever might have some sort of identification on it, so it could be traced. RFID chips were introduced a long time ago. They're in almost every piece of clothing, right? So that chip we just think it's a short-term radio signal, but it might not be. And they're in every product now. Authorities would be able to establish who purchased it and when. Computers would allow this to happen. The ability to save would be greatly curtailed. People would just not be able to save any considerable degree of wealth. There was some statement of recognition that wealth represents power, and wealth in the hands of a lot of people is not good for the people in charge. So if you save too much, you might be taxed. Isn't that what we just heard? Capital gains taxes, unrealized capital gains taxes, gift tax, inheritance tax, higher property taxes, you name it. Everything is that. Transaction taxes on cryptos. As you can see, this has absolutely happened. The more you save, the higher rate of tax on your savings, so your savings really could never get very far. And also, if you began to show a pattern of saving too much, you might have your pay cut. Now, let's remember the previous statement of inflation. People do not realize that inflation is a tax. It devalues what you have. So if you have, I don't know, $5,000 in your account over the period of a year, especially in the last years, you would still have $5,000 to next year, but your purchasing power was probably only 4,000 some hundred, because the devaluation of the dollar had happened. So as prices rise, rising prices are mostly inflation. It's a devaluation. Your dollar is worth less, which is a hidden tax. Inflation is nothing but a hidden tax. You know, we would say, this is now in the words of Dr. Richard Day, who gave the lecture, well, you're saving instead of spending. You really don't need all that money. The idea is to prevent people from accumulating any wealth which might have long-range disruptive influence on the system. And this is why we have been saying to our audience so long, and people have been fighting us on this, when you become wealthy, when you and you do it in an intelligent way where you diversify and you have tangible goods, it's not just that you yourself are in this construct better secured, you have more freedom to move and do things, but you're actually holding more power. 1,000 people with, let's just say, a net worth of $100,000 each are in this construct far more powerful than 1,000 individuals with $1,000 in their bank accounts. That is just a reality of this construct that we're in. Negating it doesn't do anything. We're working on changing that, of course, for the better, but for the time being, in ethical, in positive, in good ways, I encourage everyone to pay attention to that. And you know, it's not a good way to be surviving. You're not in a position to do much in terms of empowerment and and consciousness rising, even if you're constantly concerned with survival, which was their plan. Electronic payments initially would all be based on different kinds of credit cards. These were already in use in 1969 to some extent, not as much as now. So this is in a perspective of 1989 when this tape was recorded. But people would have credit cards with the electronic strip on it, and once they got used to that, then it would be pointed out the advantage of having all of that combined into a single credit card, serving as a single monetary system, and then they won't have to carry around all that plastic. And this is the progression that we're seeing with the apps now, with PayPal, with Cash App, with Venmo, and other services. This is what we're seeing with the implementation of payment systems into social media networks like Facebook and X and all that, which X will bring out their own bank, basically, and it will be like the new PayPal on X in 2025, where you will be able to do all your finances within your social media app. We talked about this in our previous show. Surveillance, implants, and televisions that watch you. So the next step would be the single card, and then the next step would be to replace the single card with a skin implant, which of course some people are already doing it. In some nations, it's more accepted than others. Nations that have already gone cashless see more interest in those kinds of technologies. The single card could be lost or stolen, give rise to problems, could be exchanged with somebody else to confuse identity. The skin implant, on the other hand, would be not losable or counterfeitable or transferable to another person, so you and your accounts would be identified without any possibility of error. And the skin implants would have to be put someplace that would be convenient to the skin. For example, your right hand or your forehand. Go look up the mark of the beast if you're not, um, you know, very well versed on scripture, and look what that said. Move forward here. There was some mention also of implants that would lend themselves to surveillance by providing radio signals. Really? Where have we heard that before? Implants that send out radio signals. Well, would you have to have an implant? Or is it enough to get a certain medical treatment? A certain weapon? Did we have countless experiments with people going away from any dense areas and go out into the boonies and do experiments with people who got and they're all emitting a unique Bluetooth signal? Did we see that? Well, interesting, right? How that happened so quickly. One more thing. Oh, this could be under the skin or a dental implant, but as you can see, it can be something else too. But in like a filling so that either fugitives or possibly other citizens could be identified by a certain frequency from his personal transmitter and could be located at any time or any place by any authority who wanted to find him, which smartphones do that, but you can still throw it away. The internal thing, not so much. One more thing was said. And before I do that, in terms of financial control, before we go into the televisions and whatnot, it isn't just the one banking system or the one currency. What most people don't realize is that the digital currency is programmable so that how it's used and for what is used can be restricted. If you have $100 in your pocket, a paper bill, as stupid as this Federal Reserve money scam or note scam is, you can still go to a store. Everyone who believes in a dollar will sell you something, and you can give them that paper, and it doesn't matter to them what you buy. You can buy a gun, you can buy liquor, you can whatever you want. With a digital currency, not just a digital representation of physical currency. So right now we sort of have digital dollars that simply are the digital representation of the idea of the physical product. That is still not programmed. The next step, a digital currency that is programmable, or is that they're doing it, so that they can restrict what you can purchase with that currency. So you can fill up your gas tank once a week, but not twice, because the currency won't buy more gas. You can maybe get fried chicken once a week, but not twice, because the currency won't allow you to buy it. It will still be there, but it's programmed not to allow you to do that. You posted something that was offensive or hate speech. Well, your currency might be programmed so that you can only buy essential foods or essential stuff for a week. So you see, this is the idea of programmable digital currency. One more thing was said. You'll be watching television and somebody will be watching you at the same time at a central monitoring station. Television sets would have a device to enable this. The TV set would not have to be on in order for this to be operative. Again, 1969, televisions hadn't been around for that long, where people had whole generations of TV watchers and viewers know. To think that your television could watch you, that it could analyze you. Every freaking $100 TV can do that now, and it does. It's taking photos of you, it's taking videos of you, even when it's turned off. We don't even talk about analyzing what you watch. I mean, most people turn on the algorithmic suggestions as to what you might like to watch. Your Netflix, your Amazon Prime, It analyzes what you've been watching, how long you've been watching, have you been skipping forward or backward, and it also analyzes your emotional expressions. It reads your face, it reads your biometric data, and based on that, it creates a very complex image of you, so it knows you, so it gives you suggestions and purchasing suggestions. Well, that's just one area that it works in, but in the background, it is creating uh, a digital copy of you that represents what you say, what you think, how you react when you cry, all those things. A full on digital upload of your personality. Also, the television set can be used to monitor what you're watching. I already said that. By the time people found out that this monitoring was going on, they would also be very dependent upon television for a number of things. Just the way people are dependent upon the telephone today, one thing the television would be used for would be purchases. You wouldn't have to leave your home to purchase. You just turn on your TV, and there would be a way of interacting with your television channel to the store that you wanted to purchase. Excuse me. Excuse me. So now let's think a little further ahead. What are we doing? We're having tablets, laptops, smartphones, the internet. So this concept is the same in the internet, just more intense, more immediate. Yes, people were teleshopping, decades ago, but it was still a kind of tedious process. You would see the products, and you would see the number, and then you would call and wait in line, and then you would give them the product, and then you would have to give them the purchase, the payment, or send a check, and then you would get it by mail. It was all not very instant. Of course, today, most purchases by most people are made online for convenience. And so there's a dependence on the internet and on the screens to a certain degree, right? Some products have moved almost entirely to the internet and are, you see maybe a small fraction of them in stores, but not much anymore because most people buy them online. This would be both convenient, but it would also make you dependent on your television slash internet or screen. So the built-in monitor would be something you could not do without. Right? We have a camera on every single device. We know an iPhone is taking an infrared photo of you every second or so, every other second. Film yourself in the dark, holding your phone next to your face. It is doing that at all times. There was some discussion of audio monitors too, just in case the authorities wanted to hear what was going on in rooms other than where the television monitor was. And in regard to this statement was made, any wire that went into your house, for example, your telephone wire, could be used this way. You don't need a telephone wire. Most people don't even have the telephone wires going into their house any longer. They have Alexas, they have Echoes, they have iPhones, they have computers, they have smart TVs, they have speakers, they have smart everything. And are they listening? Well, let's talk about um I don't know, Japanese smart toilets here for a few moments. Japanese smart toilets, okay? That have an app connection to your phone, and you can steer them, you can do whatever you want on the app. There's a good chance that while your phone is listening to me saying Japanese smart toilets, some articles about that are going to appear on your social media feed, on your YouTube, in your algorithms are going to respond to that very soon and give you suggestions. Right? We've all seen this. It's gotten to the point where you can only think about something and you go to your social media and it appears, because these technologies have been advanced very quickly, and the signals that we emit and the way that these algorithms can read it, or these AIs, has become very powerful. home ownership a thing of the past. Nothing, the past few years have shown this at an accelerated rate. Privately owned housing would become a thing of the past. The cost of housing and financing housing would gradually be made so high that most people couldn't afford it. People who already owned their houses would be allowed to keep them. Well, thank you, rulers. But as years go by, it would be more and more difficult for young people to buy a house. Young people would more and more become renters, particularly in apartments or condominiums. This was also 1969, where, think about it, the American dream had really just, it was a booming era. It was after World War II, the decades after World War II. The boomers were coming up. Money was spent everywhere. The American dream was to buy your home. Mortgages were becoming more and more normal. And to think that in the booming years of the American dream, someone was saying, hey, in the future, kids will not be able to afford home any longer. They'll be 30, 35, 40, still renting, not purchasing their homes. And owning will become so expensive because of taxes. Well, here we are. What is happening today? BlackRock, Vanguard, and all the other big funds, what are they doing? They're buying up entire neighborhoods, not for speculation, not to sell them at a higher price, but to own them in perpetuity and rent them back to the people. This is becoming more, it is delayed in certain places, in certain states, but certainly in European countries, it is more prevalent, more and more, that young people remain renters. Over renters, you have complete control, right? Home ownership, even though it's not real ownership because you still owe the yearly rent, the property tax to the government, but there are a few more steps to take before they can completely take it from you. Gradually, more and more of the population would be forced into small apartments which would not accommodate very many children. This is life in China, for example, right? A lot of people in very small places, in certain Japanese areas, in other places in the world, this is already becoming more common. Then, as the number of real homeowners diminished, they would become a minority. There would be no sympathy for them from the majority who dwelled in the apartments, and then these homes could be taken by increased taxes or other regulations that would be detrimental to homeownership and would be acceptable to the majority. What are these other possibilities? Well, one thing is that you can assume that the majority of homeowners have a mortgage. A bank requires you to have insurance, right? When insurance becomes so high, you think of areas that are constantly bombarded with weather warfare, droughts, tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, and whatnot. Every year, insurance is going up. Fewer and fewer independent insurance companies exist. They're all bundled up into big conglomerates, into big corporations, and they dictate. They still have 50 names, but those 50 names that sound like, some local small insurance are owned by the big ones, and the insurance rates go up. So now you might be able to afford the mortgage, but you're not able to afford the insurance any longer. And then eventually you sell, and what you do is rent. That is one of the ways that they're doing it. Ultimately, people would be assigned where they would live, and it would be common to have non-family members living with you. This is sort of a little bit of unthinkable, but what has been suggested in New York City and other sanctuary cities to welcome refugees into your home. It's never the politicians who do it, though, is it? This by way of your not knowing just how far you could trust anybody, right? This would be all under the control of a central housing authority. The arrival of the totalitarian global system. Here we are. This is 1969. And this is sort of where the lecture came to an end. We've covered a lot of ground, but it's quite astonishing just how detailed this all was. When the new system takes over, people will be expected to sign allegiance to it, indicating that they don't have any reservations or holding back to the old system. There just won't be any room, he said, for people who won't go along. We can't have such people cluttering up the place, so such people would be taken to special places, FEMA camps. Somewhere in this vein, he said that there would not be any martyrs. What that meant was they would not be killed in such a way or disposed of in such a way that they could serve as inspiration to other people the way martyrs do. Rather, he said something like this: people will just disappear. Well, we've seen this in the holistic medical practitioner community, unprecedented over the last 10, 15 years. How many have disappeared? Suicided, accidents. Even in the medical community over the last years, that have the scientists that have gone against the grain, there aren't many martyrs. A martyr, you know, you could say martyr is a bad thing, John. We don't want martyrs. We don't want people to have to die. But listen, if for whatever reason you leave this body honoring the truth in such a powerful way that millions of people can see it, well, there's worse things I could think of, right? But that is very rarely being allowed. Like you've people like Dr. Buttar, who was very early on in the COVID era, a very vocal fighter, a warrior, true warrior, great spirit, loved the man. And I was sort of maybe because we're in a state of war and so much is happening, but that sort of went under when he died, and he was killed, right? He was killed through induced sickness. Rainer Füllmilch, who is a German attorney who has done a lot in the prosecution of the perpetrators, was sort of just whisked away in a sting operation where they where they told him a cover story to come to the embassy, the German embassy, and they just took him away. These things are happening and have been happening for a very long time. But to go back to, and I don't want, excuse me, you know, David Icke, whom we talked about in the last 2 days quite a lot, he's alive and well and all that, but it is important, you know, all the silencing, all the censorship of him, the travel bans and all of that, to make this visible to the people serves a great purpose. So if the man is basically banned from most countries in the world, can't travel, can't speak in places, that is a huge, you know, that's bad for him personally as a human being. It's a big burden to carry. But if we at least amplify what is happening, if we at least show to the people and make a big fuzz about it, it serves a purpose, because many more people can sort of go, wait a minute, why are they doing this? Is he a terrorist? Has he hurt anyone? Has he threatened anyone? Is he a criminal? No. He's just speaking truth to power. So when we become, and this is what I've said often about the censorship of the last years, when in 2020 they started deleting channels, and they deleted us a few times, by the way. When they started deleting huge channels that have been around for a very long time, just, you know, they deleted Alex Jones, they deleted David Icke and whatnot. Those were shocks to the system. In the truth and freedom community, there was a shock going through it. 5 years later, nobody's shocked about that any longer. It isn't even a headline. Nobody cares. That's bad. That is like, you know, we've used up the sensitivity. But to think that people's voices get just deleted, not because they were threatening anyone or because they're charged or convicted criminals. No, just because they don't want them to say what they're saying. That is Orwellian. That is totalitarian. That is the new order of barbarians in place. My goodness, what's happening here today? My apologies, friends. I'm trying to figure this out here. Just a few additional items sort of thrown in here in the end. This is what Dr. Dunegan has said, which I failed to include where they belong more perfectly. And actually, it's just one item. I left the rest out because he really had talked about it. The bringing in of the new system, he said, probably would occur on a weekend in the winter. Everything would shut down on Friday evening, and Monday morning, when everybody wakened, there would be an announcement that the new system was in place. During the process in getting the United States ready for these changes, everybody would be busier with less leisure time and less opportunity to really look about and see what was going on around them. And here, I want to use what what was just said about bringing in the new system, this announcement on a, over the weekend, and tie it to a theory that has been floating around for the past 25 years on the internet, which is exactly that. It's interesting how they psyop their way into opposition circles. So you have people that have known about these plans for many years and decades, that have talked about these plans. I've known about these plans for decades, and we've talked about this. But what I saw in our circles was a co-opting and a psyoping, where they would talk about things like Nasara and Jasara. We talked about this in a separate show. A new quantum financial system, a new system for the world, which is exactly what these psychopaths talk about. But they sold it to the people as something good that would free everybody, would give everybody money, like universal basic income, something like that. And a lot of people in our communities have invested in that, fallen for that. And they've been told over and over again that this upcoming weekend, the new system's going to go online. People, on Friday, it's going to shut down. And Monday morning, the new system will be online. Everything will be good for everyone. Or they tell people the system went online last weekend and it's just not announced yet. So you see how this is all meshed together, and how all these things are being, and people are being led on this constantly dangling carrot of hopium, right? They're always dangling this carrot of hopium in front of people's faces, when the real hope is knowledge about, yes, these external plans, yes, these psychopaths, but really knowledge about who we are. None of this, all of this could stop today. There is absolutely nothing that can be done against a more unified and awakened public. Nothing. There's nothing. Not even bombs, not even these weapons can really do anything on a large scale if we awaken to what and who we truly are. And I see a lot of people clinging on to this system that we currently have as if this is a good one. And they're doing so much to preserve it, when this system is just a predecessor. It's just a stepping stone to this order of the barbarians, of these psychopaths. So this system must crumble. It was the enslavement system. It must crumble. But the idea that a new system from the top has to be presented to us, and we have to participate, is nothing short of ludicrous. We are free beings with free consciousness, free minds, free thoughts, and free actions if we choose to be. If anything, this shows you how the level of planning, how the level of execution has worked. What can we learn from this? What can we learn from our self-appointed masters, if you will? What we can learn is that it requires much more than just love and light to change something. You have to embody that which you wish to be. You have to have a clear vision of a future. You have to take concrete action steps to the future. You have to anticipate opposition and diffuse it before it starts to really happen. all of these things are part of an adult life, if you will, in this construct. And most people are just playing it like children, and you know, they're just hoping for the best. Let's just send love and light into the direction of this, and all's going to be good. That's not how it works. We are creators. Creation is an active thing. It's a tangible thing. It starts in thought and combining thoughts and feelings into a constructive, into a positive vision, an image, right? A beautiful image, which we infuse with feelings. And then based on that image, we take action. We move our bodies in a direction of where we want to go every single day in some way. We raise our consciousness through certain practices. We refuse to cooperate with our own enslavement. You know, once you make that choice, like life required that choice of all of us in 2020. Some people had already made it before. Some people had reinforced that choice. But I you know, Christine and I sat down, literally sat down around a dinner table when it was clear where 2020 was going in the early days. And we laid out the line in the sand. And I said, this is the hill I'm willing to die on. If and when some psychopath comes knocking on my door, there's going to be a reaction to that. And if that's the day I leave this body, I will not comply. I will not participate. That's just how it is. When you have that sorted out and you have that lose your fear of the death of the body, you can commit to the truth and to your authenticity and to who you are in a very, very powerful way, because you're not concerned with fear and worry any longer. And this is what this time really calls for. I'm not, you know, to say we're going to go to war and kill all these people. They're like they're like the Hydra. You know, you cut off one head and two appear. That's not how this works. This is a war of frequencies. This is a war of consciousness. And we have to raise ours to a level that they could never come to, where it cannot be co-opted any longer. If in the process you have to defend yourself, by all means do it. You know, I always say this. If violence is being brought to your doorstep or against your family, you got to do what you got to do and neutralize that violence and not feel bad about it. If anyone, you know, if anyone attacks you, you know, take care of them. Boom, done. But you know, that's one little aspect. The bigger aspect is for us to step into the power of who we are as true creators. Stop fucking acquiescing. How could anything be brought upon us if we unite in that true power? Right? This has another effect. That's the last thing I'm going to say today. The psychopath level is only a small fraction. That's the inverted consciousness that's so far removed from source, probably will somehow be turned into dust, right? That's all that you can do with that. But then there is the large middle group. The large middle group, yeah, you know, they're followers. Now, to try to change that in the short term, and we need short-term solutions, not very likely. But what they are is followers. So if they see an alternative that is good, that maybe doesn't include war and sickness and famine and violence and all that crap, well, they might just turn and follow the small group of people who, in unified consciousness, march forward into a different vision. That is what we can do. And that is what does work often. It will not necessarily, you know, elevate their consciousness to the same level, but they will give their attention and power to where we're going. And it will be good for everyone. Not ruling over anybody, just leading the way, if you will. And so if you can take away from this 3-part series the confirmation that there are no coincidences, that what has transpired in the past, I mean, we're just talking about the past 55 years when it's really hundreds and thousands of years, but what has transpired in the last half century was all planned out meticulously down to the tiniest minutia. If you can accept that finally, because a lot of people are still fighting that notion, we can go into the real counter, which is fully turning inward, amplifying everything, becoming fully self-reliant on all levels. This can truly change things in an instant, and stop putting our energy into a system that seeks to destroy us. If we can take that away, we've taken a lot away from it. I would encourage you, if you feel inspired and inclined to do so, share this series. And if there's going to be a lot of people who say, where's the proof? Where's the evidence that he said that in 1969? Okay. We don't have that evidence. We have a guy that was there in 69 and told us in 1989 that this is what was said in 69. Let's just assume that he made it up, and the first time that this came out was 89. It is still a pretty solid prediction for what has transpired since 89, considering there was no internet, there was no large library of things that guy could have watched or read or whatever. It was difficult to get that kind of information. Just saying. All right, my friends. Happy New Year. All the best for you. Wishing you a wonderful start into 2025. And as challenging as it's going to be in many ways, because they keep throwing shit at us, we are only going to rise and rise and rise through the bullshit. We're going to push our head through the cloud of bullshit. We're going to rise above it so high that they can throw what they want, right? And we're going to be even more than the Hydra. When they try to cut off one of our heads, 1,000 will appear. So it's game over. It's game over for them. They're just trying to delay it. Much love, my friends. Many blessings. We'll be with you again very, very soon.
Right now, you could be only a few clicks away from experiencing something amazing, something that has changed thousands of lives all over the world. I'm talking about a high consciousness field similar to those at pilgrimage sites and sacred places. It's where people go to heal, to connect, and to become the best possible version of themselves. With FLFE, you can bring such a high consciousness field into your home right now. It's a spiritual quantum technology based on the work of Nikola Tesla. Better sleep, more energy, greater well-being, improved finances, electrosmog mitigation. These are only some of the things people on the FLFE service are experiencing. Try it now for 15 days completely free of charge, no credit card needed. Just click on a link down below to start your free, no strings attached FLFE trial right now.